Chapter 5. The history of life has general patterns, such as climates and distribution of oceans and land masses that have changed over time, affecting the geographic distribution of organisms. The taxonomic composition of the biota has changed continually as new forms have originated and others have become extinct. At several times, extinction rates have been particularly high. The diversification of higher taxa has included increases both in number of species and in the variety of their forms and ecological habits. Extinct taxa have sometimes been replaced by unrelated but ecologically similar taxa, and the geographic distributions of many taxa have changed greatly. The Precambrian time covers the vast bulk of the Earth's history, starting with the planet's creation about 4.5 billion years ago and ending with emergence of complex, multi-celled life forms almost 4 billion years later. The Precambrian is the earliest of the geologic ages, which are marked by different layers of sedimentary rock. Laid down over the millions of years, these rock layers contain a permanent record of the Earth's past, including the fossilized remains of plants and animals buried within the sediments that were formed. The Paleozoic is bracketed by two of the most important events in the history of animal life. At its beginning, multi-celled animals underwent a dramatic explosion in diversity, and almost all living animal phyla appeared within a few millions of years. At the other end of the Paleozoic, the largest mass extinction in history wiped out approximately 90% of all marine animal species. The causes of both of these events were not fully understood and the subject of much research and controversy. Roughly halfway in between animals, fungi, and plants colonized the land and the insects took to the air. The dinosaurs and the mammals appeared during the Triassic period, roughly 225 million years ago. The dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. The Mesozoic era lasted about 180 million years and is divided into three periods. The Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous is often called the Age of Reptiles. Laurasia and Gondwana began to separate during this time.
As you already learned that natural selection is one of the evolutionary changes, it is important to understand that natural selection is not the only process of evolutionary change, since most biologists define evolution as a change in the proportion of allele in a population. For example, every individual has two copies of each gene, so when the offspring are born, one member of each pair of genes from a parent goes into the offspring along with one from the other parent. To have a better understanding, there's the example of when a person has an AB blood type. If you have an AB blood type and only have one child, there's a 50% of possibility that the child can get either an A or B allele. Having some alleles that may or may not be passed on to the generation, it seems as if this is a sampling of genes or taking a chance. Because of random sampling, the proportion of different alleles can change over time by chance. A new mutation will arrive and either rise or fall in the frequency due to random sampling. Since it is random, the gene will be fixed or lost in a population. Genetic drift is any random change in the frequency in genes over time, which happens to be one of the types of evolution since the frequency of alleles change over time. Can you guess what is the difference between genetic drift and natural selection? Even though genetic drift and natural selection both produce genetic change, genetic drift is the random process, whereas natural selection does not act on randomness. Drift change the frequency of alleles regardless of how useful they can be, while natural selection gets rid of harmful allele and increases the frequency of good allele. Those are the main differences between genetic drift and natural selection. Did you know that genetic drift can overpower natural selection, especially in a small population? The sample effect is very large that it increases the frequency of genes that are harmful, which is the reason why there's a high incidence of several diseases such as Tay-Sachs and gastro diseases. Since some variation in DNA can be neutral, variants are liable to evolve by drift. For instance, some mutations will not affect the sequences of the protein that it produced and don't change the fitness of the carrier. There was a debate among biologists regarding genetic drift versus selection, since some biologists believe that genetic drift has to occur, since any population of finite size, there are always a sampling effect. While there are some biologists believe that genetic drift has to occur, there are other biologists believe that natural selection has to happen. Although the theory of natural selection predicts what type of adaptations are expected to be found has been fulfilled, there are people that would like to see natural selection in action. It was shown that selection has been an important cause of evolution, since selection causes small changes over a few generations. Because artificial selection is parallel to natural selection, the breeder, which is the dog in this scenario, was used as an example. Did you know that the breeder worked well transforming animals and wild plants into different forms that are good to eat or satisfy our need? They would do this by selecting variation present in their ancestors. The breeder and dog will scope other types of dog to their liking, which can change the shade and thickness of their fur, quirk of behavior, and temperament. When it comes to dog breeding, it was almost successful since it met 2 out of 3 requirements for evolution. First, there was variation in color, shape, size, and behavior in ancestral lineage. And secondly, the variation that was produced by genetic mutation could be inherited. All these breeds, such as retrievers and chihuahua, were selected in less than 10,000 years ago, and only 0.1% of the time it took wild dog species to diversify from their common ancestor. If artificial selection can produce diversity quickly, it becomes easier to accept that lesser diversity of wild dog arose by natural selection acting over a period of time. The difference between artificial selection and natural selection is when it comes to artificial selection, the breeder will be responsible for which variants are good or bad for them. Did you know that evolution can happen in a test tube? The way it will happen is that the microbes, such as bacteria, will divide as often as 20 minutes, which gives us a chance to observe evolutionary change. This particular evolutionary change met all 3 requirements of evolution, which include variation, heritability, and differential survival and production of variants. Microbes, such as bacteria, can adapt anything, such as toxin, virus, antibiotic, and natural enemy. Linke did a study on E. coli to show that E. coli can adapt into a new environment by putting identical strains of E. coli under conditions where their food was depleted each day and renewed the net. Over the next 18 years, it was shown that bacteria continued to create new mutations. The laboratory adaptations are not always easy, since the challenge is to take the gene away that the microbe needs to survive. Barry Hall and his colleagues decided to do their study by removing the gene, which enabled the E. coli to produce enzymes that allow bacteria to break down the sugar lactose. The E. coli without gene was put into an environment containing only lactose as the only food source. First, the E. coli wasn't able to grow, but after a short time, the function of the missing gene was taken over by another enzyme, could do so because of the new mutation. As it got to the third mutation at a different gene, allowed bacteria to take up lactose from the environment more easily. Overall, it showed that natural selection can improve the evolution of a complex biochemical system, and selection does not create new traits out of nowhere. It also produced new adaptations by modifying the pre-existing features. Antibiotics were introduced in 1940, and everyone thought that this medicine would cure infectious diseases such as pneumonia, strep throat, and tuberculosis. At first, the antibiotic was successful, but as time goes on, the effectiveness of drug decreases since Some bacteria were resistant to a drug, which is part of natural selection. A particular drug was called penicillin that was once effective until staph strains were resistant to this drug. What causes higher resistance to a drug was mutation. Several diseases will be resistant to a particular drug, which make it seem as if there is an arms race between human and microorganisms. Because of this scenario, there are several drug industries that will constantly improve the drug to fight diseases.
Natural selection in the wild. We've looked at a few examples of evolution where humans had control over the selective forces. Now let's look at evolution of populations where natural selection was the driving force. Looking at cases of natural selection in the wild is difficult because evolution occurs so slowly, we can't really watch it happen very often. If we are lucky enough to observe it happening naturally, selection would have to be strong in order to speed up the change. Looking at species with a short generation times is also ideal because we can watch the change over many generations in a shorter period of time. Because evolution occurs so slowly, we will only be able to observe microevolutionary changes, which are small-scale changes. We would never be able to witness in our lifetime macroevolutionary changes, like watching a dinosaur evolve into a bird. But we know macroevolution happens because of the fossil records. So the big question is, did natural selection cause macroevolution? When a species environment doesn't change, the species has nothing new to adapt to, and this is the case for most species. So it makes it hard to observe selection. Selection at this point is called stabilizing selection, where selection continues to keep traits that are best suited for the environment. It isn't going to change the species. Once in a while, though, something happens that causes an environment to change, and we can look at the species it is affecting. One such example was in 1977, there was a drought on the Galapagos island of Daphne Major, which caused a great reduction in seeds. The medium ground finch, with varying beak sizes, prefers to eat smaller seeds with softer shells, but was forced to eat harder and larger seeds. Finch who have smaller beaks could not crack the shells and either starved to death or became too malnourished they couldn't reproduce. The birds who had larger beaks were more adapted to this new environmental change and did not starve. They were able to reproduce, and by natural selection, the next generation of average beak size was increased by 10%. Scientists were able to witness a macroevolutionary change caused by natural selection. The soapberry bug has a long needle-like beak which it uses to penetrate fruit to get to the seeds. Traditionally, the bug colonizes a soapberry bush or a balloon vine. Within the last 50 years, 3 new plants were introduced to these areas where the soapberry bug lives, and they became colonized as well. The fruit size on these plants is either larger or smaller than what the bug is used to. It was predicted that the change in host would cause natural selection to change the beak size, and that is what happened, up to 25% after a few decades. Switching to a new host plant required new adaptations to fit its new environment. There are many more examples scientists were able to witness where changes in the environment led to new adaptations through natural selection. Another question to ask is natural selection responsible for the complex features in organisms? Some traits and adaptations are harder to explain how natural selection was involved. Complex features take a very long time to evolve, too long for humans to have witnessed it. Some people, called creationists, believe that evolution can only explain so much, and that a supernatural being is responsible for complex adaptations. They call their belief intelligent design. They believe that a god automatically put into place the complex adaptation or created the mutation that led to it. Whenever many small complex adaptations come together to form a larger complex apparatus like that of the flagellum, people who believe in intelligent design argue that it defies evolution by Darwinian standards. To them, anything that hasn't been proven yet was done by a higher power. This is called the God of the Gaps argument. Each claim intelligent design makes cannot be tested, though. They will never be able to prove evolution doesn't exist. Creationists also believe that the intricate mechanism of blood clotting was done by the hand of God. This process requires 20 different proteins to interact together. Scientists believe that the process evolved from adaptation from simpler processes, An important protein in the blood clotting is fibrinogen, which is cut up by enzymes, and the little fragments called fibrin stick to each other, forming the clot. All vertebrates possess this protein and may have evolved from a protein that had a different purpose in an ancestral invertebrate. Russell Doolittle at the University of California predicted we would find this precursor protein. In 1990, him and Zun Zhu found this protein in a sea cucumber, which is an invertebrate. Sea cucumbers branched off from vertebrates 500 million years ago. This protein isn't used for blood clotting, but it is related. So there was an ancestor between the sea cucumber and vertebrates, with a protein that evolved to clot blood in vertebrates only. Creationists were also trying to claim that natural selection couldn't explain extremely complex organs like that of the eye. They couldn't believe that it formed from a simpler organ, because who can use half an eye? Their argument doesn't make sense because there are plenty of species today with simple eyes, like that of the flatworm, that only has an eye spot. The eye spot only senses light. There are many species where scientists have been able to look at how their eye works to form a lens, retina, and so on. Knowing that certain species only use a portion of the camera eye then disproves creationist argument. We can see how a simple eye would adapt through natural selection because it improves fitness. Being able to see better means more food and better chances of reproducing. We can string together pieces of eyes from species to prove natural selection builds complex organs, but scientists wanted to do more. Dan Eric Nilsson and Suzanne Pelger wanted to create an eye from a simple precursor, like an eye spot from a flatworm, using a mathematical model. They used a precursor to model the evolution of the eye and prove selection can turn it into a more complex eye. The model actually made an eye using 1,829 small adaptations. Scientists have not been able to find an adaptation that they weren't able to explain using natural selection. Mathematical models can show how natural selection can create a complex feature. Looking at all of the data, scientists can say that natural selection is the cause of all adaptive evolution.